Good day and welcome to the fourth web talk in the CAEF series, The Many Faces of Islamic Anti-Semitism. Today our special guest is Elaine Ellinger, and she has titled her talk, Medina to McGill, Tracing Anti-Semitism Across Time. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, a national charitable organization that has been educating Canadians about anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred since 2004. But it would seem that our message is not getting through. Rising anti-Semitism is alarming and ought to have led to specific actions and not just robust statements of concern. People have been sleepwalking through the decades of growing Jew hatred and are now waking up and seeing that this hatred is not just directed at Jews, but is an attack on our Western values and cultures. Israel is the key target and is increasingly isolated, but it is the front line on the anti-Western, campaigns that are underway. I want to thank the following co-sponsoring organizations that are equally concerned about the surge in Jew hatred: the Lodger Center Congregation, Toronto Zionist Council, the Israel Activist Calendar, the Mattathias Project, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem in Canada, the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, North Carolina Coalition for Israel, the Israel Committee of Sonoma County, and End Jew Hatred Canada. We welcome other NGOs to collaborate and promote programs with us. We have been collaborating on many projects, including funding research into anti-Semitism, co-sponsoring events, hosting a Jewish social work study and network, producing educational materials for K-12, funding and promoting the Indigenous Embassy Jerusalem Symposium and the recent Canadian Symposium on Anti-Semitism. We work with many allied communities and want to encourage others to reach out and develop common cause with both Jewish and non-Jewish organizations. If you'd like to support CAEF financially or volunteer, please go to our website at www.caef.ca. The topic today has raised many eyebrows. There is sincere concern in the Jewish and non-Jewish communities about referencing Islam as a source of anti-Semitism, and we are always encouraged to make a distinction between Islam and Islamism, the latter being the term coined to describe the politicization of Islam in the last half century, a movement that gave rise to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Samadoun, and many other Islam-inspired organizations. Canada has a long list of banned terrorist entities, many supported by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and others by the government of Qatar, which has been funding Hamas and which controls Al Jazeera, a global broadcaster of anti-Semitic propaganda. However, the source of the Islamist or political Islam's agenda needs to be examined. This has been extensively done by our guest speaker, Elaine Ellinger. Elaine's interest in Islam began in 1983 owing to a chance encounter with a Baha'i refugee who had fled Iran during the revolution. At that time, she was working as a child protection social worker in Canada. Since then, she spent many years researching, writing, and speaking about the growing influence of Sharia in non-Islamic countries, providing her material from, as she described, the perspective of a non-Muslim. Formerly, Elaine was the Canadian director and a senior researcher for a European think tank focused on Islamic doctrine. She founded the Perspectives on Islam Society in 2023 for the express purpose of providing public education on the primary teachings of Islam in the context of current events. Her book, called Timeless Essays About Islam and Its Doctrine, what it includes and why it matters, is available on Amazon. Lately, there have been many articles, speakers, and social media posts that are coming to recognize Islamic doctrine or dogma is behind the Hamas-Israel conflict and the campus and street protests across the West. But there's still a tendency to avoid talking about this. Elaine has prepared a deep dive into this complex topic. She will speak for about an hour, after which I invite you to remain on Zoom for 15 or 20 minutes for a short Q&A period. Please post your questions on the Q&A function on your screen. You may use the chat to share information, but tell us where you are. We'd love to hear from you. And please be respectful in your postings. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for that very lovely introduction. And thank you for everyone who's attending today. And I hope you can stay to the end because we will reach McGill at the end of this presentation. Now, ordinarily, I say something about everything that is on the screen. Because of time limitations, that won't be possible today. However, the information is all there. I will speak about the highlights, and I welcome anyone going back and please examining the information that I provide because it's very thorough. We'll get started with the presentation. Medina to McGill, Tracing Anti-Semitism Across Time. And we'll begin with the teachings of Islam, the foundational Islamic doctrine and context. Now, Islam is not a people. It is not a nation state. It is a belief system that is built on doctrine. And the doctrine hasn't changed in 1400 years. Now, to understand the anti-Semitism we see today, we need to trace it back to where it began, which is in the text. Now, most people have heard of the Quran. This one's mine. But few realize that it's not in chronological order. People try to read it and they often give up. It's confusing and it's contradictory. Nevertheless, the Quran is said to be the exact, unchangeable word of Allah revealed through Gabriel, but all of it was spoken by Muhammad over the period of 23 years. So the Hadith, Bukhari, are reports about Muhammad's words and actions. Now, Sunni Islam considers 6 collections authoritative, and they are authoritative, especially Bukhari, which is labeled Sahih, which means authentic, due to verified chains of transmission. These are not anonymous myths. They are central legal and doctrinal sources in Islam. They're extremely important. Now, Muhammad is the example that Muslims are supposed to follow. And it's very important to know the life story of Muhammad, and that is found in the Sirah. This is a very good one from the 8th century by Ibn Ishaq. The Quran mirrors Muhammad's life, and knowing his story lets you place the revelations in context and understand their real world purpose. Now, Sharia isn't like Western law. It's not adjustable. It's based on the Quran and Muhammad's example. In Islam, all human actions fall into 5 specific categories. They are obligatory, recommended, permitted, discouraged, or forbidden, depending on what Muhammad said or did. Now, this manual of Islamic law here is approved by Al-Azhar University and all 4 Sunni schools. It has several recommendations at the beginning. I'll refer to it throughout. It is not the source of Sharia. This is the source. However, it is a convenient summary of rulings that are well known and well established in the doctrine. Sharia itself comes from the Quran and Muhammad's example. And Islam is dualistic. Fatwas may contradict each other, but none can override Allah and Muhammad. They are the highest authority. And since there is no central authority, conflicting rulings exist, but all are valid if they are rooted in the doctrine. So we'll begin with this book right at the start. It tells you the measure of good and bad is sacred law, not reason. And Muhammad's authority equals divine authority. How is that so? Well, it's in the Quran. He who obeys Muhammad has obeyed Allah. And it is not for a believing man or woman that when Allah and Muhammad have decided a matter, that they have any choice in their affair. We put you, Muhammad, on an ordained way. And this is actually in Arabic, the word Sharia. The ordained way of Islam is Sharia, the whole thing. So follow it and do not follow the inclinations of those who do not know. And hear from the Hadith. The best talk is Allah's book, and the best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad. So I hope everyone understands how very important Muhammad and Allah are. Now, the doctrine is fixed. The Quran is considered the literal, unchangeable word of Allah. Every single letter is the direct revelation of Allah. Muhammad is the perfect model. That is repeated throughout the Quran, that he is the model to follow. He is the pattern for Muslims. So Islam includes a complete legal and political system, Sharia, that claims authority over every aspect of life. Leaving Islam is punishable by death, and any deviation as seen as what's called bid'ah, innovation, which is condemned, and in the doctrine actually says it is of the hellfire. So questioning Islam is discouraged, and I think perhaps many people are aware of that. So it is adequate for one to believe in everything brought by Muhammad, free of any doubt. What befits the common people is to refrain from discussing the subtleties of scholastic theology, lest corruption, difficult to eliminate, find its way into their basic religious convictions. But like I said, it's dualistic, so it may be presented in several different ways. The contradictory verses of the Quran and the perfect words of Allah are all true because they came from Allah and Muhammad. But the later verses are considered better or stronger than the earlier verses. Whatever verse we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring a better one or one similar to it. There are different rules for believers and unbelievers, different laws for men and women, different doctrine depending on the situation, and no golden rule to treat all as you would like to be treated. Now, many people think there is a golden rule in Islam. Not quite. So there's dualistic ethics as a result. Muhammad said, none of you will have faith till he wishes for his Muslim brother what he likes for himself. I did not add that word. If you look up this hadith online, it will very likely be included so that there can be no misunderstanding. And that's where I copied it from online, looking up Bukhari 13, there it is. Conversely, the Quran says, I will cast terror into the hearts of those who have disbelieved. So strike them over the neck, smite all over their fingers and toes. Muhammad said, whoever conceals the faults of a Muslim, Allah will conceal him his faults in this world in the day of resurrection. So many people were saying in regards, for example, the UK grooming gangs, the community is aware. They know this is going on. Nobody reports. Why doesn't anybody report? Well, because of this. Concealing the faults of a fellow Muslim is rewarded both now and in paradise, and it is an enormity according to Sharia to show others the weak points of the Muslims. So we'll get into the early Meccan period. So this is before there are Jews around. There were no Jews in Mecca. And at the age of 40, Muhammad began to have visions. He said that the angel Gabriel commanded him to read. He thought he might be going mad or a poet. He contemplated suicide. Now, Khadija was his wife. For the first 25 years, he had only one wife. She was a very powerful, rich widow. She had caravans. He ran the caravan. She asked him to marry her. She called her cousin, who was a Christian. He came and said that Muhammad must be a prophet. Well, this went on privately for a few years. His only followers were his close relatives and friends. So after 3 years, God said, proclaim what you have been ordered and turn aside from the polytheists. Now, this is because Mecca was a polytheistic society. They had 360 idols in the Kaaba. So Allah said to Muhammad, say, I am the one who warns plainly. And he did warn plainly. And this is throughout the Quran is this mention of people being warned to follow Islam, Allah, and Muhammad. Now, just before he went public. Now, this is Al-Tabari. Now, Al-Tabari is a very, and I only use the highest credibility Islamic sources, all right? Like there can be no question about the sources. I use these are the same sources that the Imams and the Jihadis use. So Al-Tabari is one of the most detailed and influential Islamic histories. And in the very, very early period, just before coming out, a man had gone to the Kaaba and he saw another man come out and pray, and a woman came, and then a youth, his nephew Ali, and he said, or his cousin, and he said to his friend, Abbas, what is this religion? I don't recognize this religion. And he said, this is Muhammad, who claims that God sent him as a messenger and that the treasures of Persia and Rome will be given to him by conquest. This is at the very beginning, not about preaching, that they will be given to him by conquest. Now, most people have not heard that. So what people also hear is that in the beginning, that Muhammad was very favorable towards the Jews, and that's also not the case. So what you do find, though, is historical references. So in the Quran, we gave the children of Israel the scripture and preferred them over other worlds. So in Mecca, the Quran acknowledges Allah gave the Torah to Moses and once favored the children of Israel, but this is historical recognition, not praise of the Jews as a people, and the Jews are never praised as a righteous community, only reminded of their past favor, which becomes a contrast to their later disobedience. And here are the first 86 chapters of the Quran. As you can see, number 2 isn't there. Number 2 is actually the 87th revelation, and it begins with the migration to Medina. But I have actually been through every single one of these and read every ayah, which is verse, about Jews. And the very best we'll get to in a second. But Jews serve as a reminder to obey the prophets. And this is another theme that comes up over and over, that people need to obey their prophets, specifically Muhammad. And from the Quran, we have sent you a messenger, Muhammad, to be a witness, just as we sent Moses to Pharaoh. But Pharaoh disobeyed the messenger, Moses, so we seized him with a severe punishment. So people should expect punishment if they don't follow their prophets, such as Muhammad. And this is the very best Quran verse I was able to find from that section. It says, among the people of Moses is a community which guides by truth and establishes justice. But this is what's called a Quranic argument. It begins with one and it ends with something else. It says among the people. So certainly Adam is considered a Muslim. Moses, Noah, those would all be considered among the people who guide by truth. But it was divided into 12 tribes, and many transgressed. And Allah said, be you apes, despise, afflict them with evil torment. Muhammad said his coming was foretold. And the legacy from this, because throughout I'm going to refer to the legacy, what we are still seeing today. Okay, so there was no direct interaction with Jews yet, but Muhammad was seeking Jewish validation by referencing Moses and biblical stories. This gave him credit. So he depicted the Jews, though, as rebellious, ungrateful, and groundwork for future hostility. And I will give you the overriding example from this period. And that is, now this is the 5th revelation, but it's the first chapter in the Quran. And it is said by devout Muslims 17 times a day. And it ends with, guide us to the straight path, the way on those of whom you have bestowed your grace, not the way of those who have earned your anger, such as the Jews, or those who went astray, such as the Christians. Now, I didn't add that. Again, this is commentary that is in my Quran. They want to make sure there is no misunderstanding. This is well known in Islam. The ones who earned the anger were the Jews. And this is, like I said, 14 centuries of saying this 17 times a day. So Muhammad had to leave Mecca because his protectors died, both his wife Khadija and his uncle Abu Talib. And it's often said that Muhammad was harassed, he was persecuted in Mecca. But let's have a closer look at that. Here's an example from the Quran. What is he saying? May the hands of Abu Lahab be ruined. His wealth won't help him. He'll burn in a fire of blazing flame. His wife as well, the carrier of firewood around her neck is a rope of twisted fiber. This is Muhammad's aunt and uncle. So when you're saying things like this, and you're saying that ancestors will be cursed and burn in hell, you're not making friends and influencing people. So there was a lot of division that occurred in Mecca, a formerly polytheistic society, very tolerant. Now there's a lot of division, and people were prevailing upon his uncle to please do something about your nephew, but he was unsuccessful. So Muhammad migrated with at the most 150 followers. Now the highest number I've ever seen given is 50 to 100, and I put 150 just to show, that, being generous here, if you included the children and the women, etc., he might have had 150 followers after 13 years. Now, when he reached Medina, there was a significant change of tactics. He became a military leader and politician. The migration to Medina marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. This is the beginning of the calendar, not here. And when you hear terms like the pre-Islamic period of ignorance, all right, that actually includes that earlier period, because The hijab, for example, was not introduced until 5 years after migrating to Medina. But they'll say, well, they didn't wear the hijab in the pre-Islamic period of ignorance. That's 18 full years. And this is by far the more important part so far as the expansion growth of Islam. Jihad is adopted and the Sharia is established. Had Muhammad continued just preaching religion, we can extrapolate there would have been 265 believers at the time of his death, but instead it spread through conquest. And you'll often hear people say as well that the jihad is an internal struggle, that's what it really means. Now, this statistical work was done by Dr. Bill Warner. He's analyzed the text that I showed you at the beginning of the talk. And as I said, in the Meccan Quran, there's no jihad, but in the Medina Quran, fully a quarter of that section of text is about jihad and 2/3 of the life of Muhammad in the Sirah. And it is very, very violent. And here is a hadith Muhammad said from one of those 6 authentic collections, which is all I use. I command you with 5. Now, this is a different 5 pillars, isn't it? 5 that Allah commanded me. Listen and obey, that is Sharia. Jihad, hijrah, this is migration, and the prayer. And if you look at Bukhari, 98% of the jihad, when you read them, are violent. So if we have a closer look, what does it actually mean in this handbook of Sharia law? It says clearly, jihad means to war against the non-Muslim to establish the religion. Then it gives 3 examples of what that means from the Quran. It carries on that jihad is a communal obligation, and he who provides the equipment for a soldier in jihad has himself performed jihad. So that includes things like money and other support. If none of those concerned perform jihad, and it does not happen at all, everyone who is aware that it is obligatory is guilty of sin. That's how important jihad is. It is a sin if somewhere in the world it is not being performed. And the Quran says, fighting has been enjoined upon you while it is hateful to you, but perhaps you hate a thing and it is good for you. Perhaps you love a thing and it is bad for you. And Allah knows while you know not. Muhammad said, there are 6 things with Allah for the martyr. So why would anybody want to be a martyr? Well, he has forgiven all of his sins with the first flow of blood. He has shown his place in paradise. The crown of dignity is placed upon his head. It was really important to understand the inverted ethics here, that jihad is a crown of dignity. And we hear, children in Gaza wanting to grow up to be their hero, jihadi, and that is coming directly from the doctrine, which they are certainly supplied with. They will also be given 72 wives, the Houris of paradise. Now, these are not women from earth. According to Muhammad, he saw hell and it was mostly full of women. These are celestial beings, and he may intercede for 70 of his close relatives. Muhammad said, the person who participates in holy battles in Allah's cause and nothing compels him to do so, he will be recompensed with a reward or booty if he survives, or admitted to paradise if he is killed. Had it not been difficult for his followers, he would not have remained behind. He would have gone for jihad, loved to be martyred in Allah's cause, made alive, martyred, made alive, martyred again. This is the example Muslims are supposed to follow. Where does the money come from? Now, most belief systems have some sort of charity, and it's expected that it will go to the poor and needy. And of course, in Islam, it does as well. But this is Quran 960, and it's referred to in other places in the Quran as well, which specifies exactly which categories are to be financed. Now, this Islam is actually, it has a taxation system. It is a socio-political economic system of governance, and it does have religious aspects, of course, but it is, with all of the law and taxation, it is a system of governance. And the two we need to be concerned about are bringing hearts together. And this would, if you were looking at a modern tax bill, you're spending on the fire department and the hospital, this would be Ministry of Public Information and Propaganda. This is to sweeten hearts to Islam. That's how it's described. And also the cause of Allah, fi sabilillah, which is military and includes activist groups. So both imams and jihadis cite the doctrine as their authority. And you don't need to take my word for it. Here we go. This is from the Sharia manual. There are 8 categories. It is obligatory to distribute 1/8 to each category. And the 7th category is for those fighting for Allah, meaning people engaged in Islamic military operation for whom no salary has been allotted in the roster. They are volunteers for jihad. No other belief system finances a military component in perpetuity. Now, this is a modern day Sharia standards manual accounting, and you will find a jihad on page 896. So in the West, there's more and more Islamic finance happening, marketing, halal products, etc. Halal simply means lawful. So this is generating also profits, and that 2.5% tax must be paid on that. The highest halal food expenditure per capita is in Europe and North America. So very much non-Muslims are also contributing to this financing. Now, just a quick timeline. This is Mecca, looking at the doctrinal shift, past favor, followed by criticism, historical account only, then the migration. Now begins open hostility, first Jewish tribe expelled, second Jewish tribe expelled, third Jewish tribe enslaved and beheaded. So in the early Medina period, this is when Muhammad has first arrived. Now he's lost his protectors. It's the beginning of jihad with the migration. Now there are Jews. Medina had 3 tribes of Jews, major tribes, approximately 50% of the population. But they did not accept Muhammad as he had expected. So the jihad began with raids on the Meccan caravans because they needed financing. And when he arrived, honestly, it's not much different from Mecca, because the Jews were celebrating the fast of Ashura. And what Muhammad said is, you Muslims have more right to celebrate Moses' victory than they have. So of course, this isn't going to make you friends and either. And the justification is Quran 2:124. Allah said, my covenant does not include the wrongdoers, and he's already established the Jews are the wrongdoers. So Muhammad's claim is incoherent from a Jewish or biblical perspective. Moses was a Hebrew from the tribe of Levi, prophetic and priestly lineage, a covenant continuity through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Davidic lineage, and Muhammad was not a descendant of Isaac, let alone David. So, what's going on here? According to Muhammad, all prophets preached Islam, and this goes right back to Adam. All are born Muslims. Lineage doesn't matter, only submission to Allah. That Ishmael's lineage is rehabilitated, and he claims that the Kaaba was built by Abraham and Ishmael, and lineage is replaced by divine appointment, that Muhammad is presented as the seal and summation of all prophets. And the first thing he did was to build a mosque. Now, people think of mosques as houses of worship, like churches and synagogues. But actually, the mosque was used, and the references are here, as a court for trials, verdicts, decrees, a place to carry out a sentence. People were stoned right on the front steps, a war chamber, storage for weapons, and receiving foreign delegations. Also as a prison for war captives. And he also established the Charter of Medina, which is still referenced today. This is very, very much a legacy. This is actually in place. I'll explain that later at the UN. So believers are friends one to another, to the exclusion of outsiders. And this is when he created the Ummah. Now, nobody else did this. Muhammad did this. He divided the world into the Ummah and everyone else. So he said, if any dispute arose, it had to be referred to Allah and Muhammad, and that he was the apostle of Allah. And of course, this isn't going down very well with the Jews. So after arriving in Medina, we're looking at Islam's view of the Jews again. But now the narrative is not just historical. And repeatedly, he says they alter the words of Allah, they kill the prophets, they're cursed and described as apes and swine. Islam does not praise the Jews. It uses their past as proof of their present guilt. The Jews and Christians were accused of corrupting their scriptures. So Muhammad turned his direction of prayer from Jerusalem to Mecca and looked to see who would turn their prayer with him, who were willing to follow Muhammad. And of course, the Jews and Christians did not. And at this same early time, deception was introduced into Islamic doctrine. There was a Jew, he was a poet, and he mocked Muhammad. And Muhammad said, "Who will kill Ka'b? He has maligned Allah, the exalted, and his messenger." So one of his followers said, "Messenger of Allah, do you wish that I should kill him?" And Muhammad said, "Yes." So the man said, "Permit me to talk to him in the way I deem fit." He said, "Talk as you like." And so they pretended to be friends with him, got close, and they killed him. He was assassinated. He isn't the only one who was assassinated in this way. Now, there are several types of taqiyya. These are deception. These are the most well-known, and they are sanctioned by the doctrine. Here it is. Scholars say there is no harm in giving a misleading impression if it is required by an interest countenanced by sacred law. That outright lying is permissible in 3 cases: war, to settle a disagreement, or between spouses. So that's pretty wide open there. And it is permissible to lie when the goal is permissible, and obligatory if the goal is obligatory. Now, this makes it very difficult for people to trust. And this is very unfortunate, but I am sorry to say that this is sanctioned in Islamic law. So Jews should not be befriended. This is repeated 13 times actually in the Quran, that Jews should not be befriended, because some Muslims were stubbornly remaining friends with the Jews. So Allah sent down concerning them, forbidding them to be taken as friends. And this is from the Sirah of Muhammad. "They will spare no pains to corrupt you, longing for your ruin. They love you not." But it says terrible things about them. You know, that from their mouths hatred has already been shown, and what their breasts conceal is greater. So this is really saying nasty things about the Jews as well. And of course, it then came down from Allah. So it's in the Quran as well. So what is the legacy today? That modern Islamic documents and apologists cite the Charter of Medina as a precedent for Islamic governance. I was in a lecture where I heard this brought up, that the Charter was a wonderful example. Well, really, you can make up your own mind about that. That initial cooperation is used to build power before later isolation and subjugation. And military use of mosques and deception are sanctioned. Now, you see, this is a headline, and it says nothing is sanctioned because they have found these weapons in a mosque in Lebanon. But according to Islamic doctrine, this is a sacred use of a mosque because Muhammad did it. So Muhammad acquired money by raiding caravans and in loans. And this is called a tafsir. Now, this is Ibn Kathir. And again, this is a very excellent commentary. And if you don't understand a Quranic verse, then you can look it up in a commentary. And this is a very good one. As it says here, it's this particular thing we're wanting a loan is mentioned in several parts of the Quran. And Ibn Kathir is from the 14th century, and I'll refer to him a couple of times. But this is just an excellent commentary on the Quran for anyone who's a little confused about a verse when they read it sometimes. Now something really incredible happened. This is the Battle of Badr. And you think, well, what does this have to Jews? It has a lot to do. What happened was Muhammad was going out to raid a caravan, and the caravan heard about it. They were able to avoid him. They called for help from Mecca, and Mecca sent people out to help the caravan. So Muhammad and his followers engaged in battle with them, and they won. And they had been greatly outnumbered. So this is seen now as a gift from Allah, that Allah is with them. And his followers immediately jumped onto the spoils. So they took hostages for ransom. There were weapons, there was all kinds of spoils. And Muhammad didn't like this, and he wanted them to stop. They stopped, and he got a revelation. And the revelation is actually an entire chapter of the Quran, which is called the Spoils of War. And what was revealed is the spoils are for Allah and the Messenger. And that if there is no battle, the spoils are entirely for Allah and the Messenger. But if there is a battle, then 80% is divided amongst those who fought, and 20% is for Allah and the Messenger. Now, this is referred to so often in those texts I showed you at the beginning that I just quickly did a count. And there's 425 references to just those two terms, booty and spoils of war. So jihad is often cited as the best deed, and the booty includes the money, property, ransom, women, and slaves. And this is from that same chapter in the Quran. It's revealed it is not for a prophet to have captives until he inflicts a massacre. And that rather became the way forward. So here's an example from the Quran. Some of you want to linger behind from fighting in Allah's cause. Well, if bounty, victory, and booty comes, he'll say, I wish I'd been with them, then I would have achieved a good share of booty. This is a spiritual text. It just doesn't seem like it, does it? And the Quran also says in that same chapter, you did not kill them, it was Allah who killed them. And we hear this regularly, that it wasn't, it's not a sin on the people who have done this because Allah is guiding their hand, Allah is doing it. And here's an example from the Hadith where it clearly says, who is the best among the people? Muhammad was asked and he responded, a believer who strives his utmost in Allah's cause with his life and property. So now, feeling very, very confident with this win at Badr, he goes to the Jews in Medina. And the first tribe were goldsmiths. And he confronted them and he said, beware lest God bring upon you the vengeance he brought upon the Quraysh and become Muslims. So now they're being warned. And this is referring to the Battle of Badr, what happened to them. So they were expelled after a 15-day siege. Their wealth and weapons were seized. In the Quran, that same verse, chapter, if you fear treachery, throw their treaty back to them. This is said elsewhere in the Quran as well. So the legacy today is that Muslims are not supposed to take disbelievers as friends. This is said repeatedly. That treaties can be broken before a direct betrayal is confirmed. This is a precedent for future treatment of Jews, and it is the first example of collective punishment and wealth confiscation. And I'll also say that the Sharia manual specifies that no treaty should last more than 10 years. And if there is no date provided, that 4 years is maximum. They're for sake of convenience only. So this is the second tribe, an assassination. So Muhammad was granted a loan. He had gone to them asking for money, and they said they would give it to him. But then he was sitting by the house, and from heaven, he had a message that they would drop a stone on him. So he went and told his followers that the Banu Nadir were going to drop a stone on him. And of course, no such thing had happened, but he demanded expulsion, laid siege, and property was confiscated, palm trees destroyed. Jews were allowed to leave with only what their camels could carry and no weapons. And he said they dismantled their houses, but I think they were probably taking the mezuzah off the door sills. And the Quran, have they not seen that we set upon the land, reducing it from its borders? So this chapter in the Quran is about that incident. And it says it was Allah who expelled the ones who disbelieved from among the Jews. They thought their fortresses would protect them. Allah cast terror in their hearts. And Allah decreed for them evacuation, or he would have punished them in this world. And that is because they opposed Allah and Muhammad. Whoever opposes Allah, indeed, Allah is severe in penalty. And in this instance, they had cut down their palm trees, and they take decades to grow. And historically, this had never been done to destroy things like palm trees, because they're a means of living, very important. But Allah said that was okay. Whatever, if you've cut down of the palm trees, it was by permission of Allah. And the legacy, this is a hadith. Let us go to the Jews. If you embrace Islam, you will be safe. You should know that the earth belongs to Allah and his apostle, and I want to expel you from this land. The legacy today, it's a model for land confiscation under Islamic rule. The modern use of the Quran 59:2, you didn't think they would leave. And the economic base being destroyed, it is by permission of Allah. So we get to the final tribe. They were accused of aiding Meccans during the Battle of the Trench. And again, they were told they could convert to Islam and it would be fine, but they did not. So siege was followed by surrender, 600 to 900 men, depending on the source you read. In the Sirah, I believe it says 600 to 700, but other sources say higher numbers. Anyway, they were beheaded in a single day. Wives and children were enslaved, sold. The most beautiful woman Muhammad took for himself. Her husband had been killed, and anyway, he took her. Some you killed, others you took captive. So the legacy today, this is a core precedent for collective execution of Jews under Islamic law. It is cited in jihadi teaching today and in sermons to justify extermination rhetoric. And this is jihad according to Allah and Muhammad, not the Geneva Convention. So I really want to point out how important the example of Muhammad and Allah are, because you hear commentators saying, well, this isn't according to the Geneva Convention. Of course it isn't. They are not, the Geneva Convention is not the highest authority. Muhammad and Allah are, and that pattern is the pattern to follow. And that is what we see. And that is more or less a type of guerrilla warfare. So after 5 years, there were no Jews left in that city at all. And now Muhammad went south back to Mecca, and he established what was supposed to be a 10-year treaty with them. Well, why would he do that? You'll see. So on his way back to Medina, this was revealed. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those with him are harsh against the disbelievers, merciful among themselves. This is called the principle of wala wal bara. It's very, very important in Islam. And it's also referred to as the principle of loyalty and enmity, that loyalty is owed to Allah, Muhammad, Muslims, and Islamic law, and enmity must be shown towards disbelief, kafirs, which is another term for unbelievers, and anything outside Islamic norms. So finally, we're going to Khaybar. And Khaybar here, it's said that, these wars are defensive, but it's only defensive because people are not accepting Islam. So that's considered defensive. He's gone from Mecca now to Medina. Now he's gone on to Khaybar. Now, some of the Jews that had been expelled from Medina had gone on to Khaybar, which was an oasis. And when he reached Khaybar at night, this was his norm, was to arrive at night and listen to the morning. And if he didn't hear the Adhan prayer in the morning, which indicated that they were following Islam, then he would attack. So when it was morning, the Jews came out with their spades and baskets. Now remember, their weapons have already been taken. And when they saw him, they shouted, Muhammad and his army, the prophet said, Muhammad said, Khaybar is destroyed, for whenever we approach a hostile nation, because they've not accepted Islam, then evil will be the morning for those who have been warned. And this is where he famously shouted, Allahu Akbar. Now the next town, this was very brutal, and they were kept as dhimmis. This is the beginning of the dhimmi system. So there was an initial slaughter, but then those who remained were allowed to farm the land in exchange for paying jizya, 50% tribute to Muhammad. Now, the next town he went to, they were so terrified. Allah struck terror in the hearts of the men of Fadak when they heard what had happened to the men of Khaybar. So they sent him an offer of peace, and they just simply submitted to Islam and adopted the dhimmi system where they would pay tribute. So the key events, Khaybar was attacked post Hudaybiyah. Now this is because, having gone to Mecca and established a treaty there, his southern flank was protected and he was able to go north. Now Kanana was tortured. He was the leader of the Khaybar. Fire was lit on his chest. They were trying to get him to tell where the treasure was. His wife Safiya, whose husband was killed and cousin was killed and father was killed, was taken as a bride by Muhammad that very night. The Jews were allowed to work the land in exchange for a 50% tribute. And this is the origin of the jizya system, which is outlined in this manual. So the legacy today, you may have heard about in Texas, they're trying to establish Islamic cities. And this man is one of the leaders in that. And he's saying Jews and Christians are filthy. Their lives and property can be taken in jihad by the Muslims. That is the legacy today. It is a legal foundation for subjugating Jews via tribute and jizya. We have Khaybar, Fadak, and that became Muhammad's personal land. So when Muhammad died, because there had been no fighting, and so the followers didn't get anything, all of the tribute went to Allah and Muhammad, right? There's nothing for the followers. There was no fight. And when Muhammad died, his descendants fought over who would now own that land and get that tribute. So the jizya practice was upheld for 1,300 years. And as I said, treaties no more than 10 years. So Allah and Muhammad established jihad as a legitimate source of income. I'll show you this in a moment, but this is taken from the book of Bukhari. You won't find it online. You have to actually have the book. And what it says in the book of jihad, there are several volumes and they contain books. In the book of jihad, and this is Quran 911, that Allah has purchased of the believers their lives and properties. The price, there shall be paradise. They fight in Allah's cause. They kill and are killed. So we'll hear that a few times. But what it says is al-jihad, holy fighting in Allah's cause, is given the utmost importance in Islam and is one of the pillars. We often hear there's 5 pillars. As you see, there is actually 6. One of the pillars on which it stands, by jihad, Islam is established. Allah's word is made superior. And his religion is propagated. By abandoning jihad, Islam and the Muslims fall in an inferior position. Their honor is lost. Their land is stolen. Their rule and authority vanish. Jihad is an obligatory duty in Islam on every Muslim. He who tries to escape this duty dies with one of the qualities of a hypocrite. And then it quotes a hadith of Muhammad saying, my livelihood is under the shade of my spear, and he who disobeys my orders will be humiliated by paying jizya. And that footnote on that page says, under the shade of my spear means war booty. So his livelihood is war booty. And here they are copied from the book for you to see. And this is from Quran, the Spoils of War chapter. Consume what you have taken of war booty as being lawful and good. It is considered a legitimate source of income, jihad. Now, Islam cannot be understood through a Western lens. And why is that? Well, if you look at Deuteronomy, essentially the West has a Judeo-Christian tradition. In fact, Europe used to be called Christendom. But if you look at Deuteronomy, it says, now choose life so that you and your children may live. And if you look at the Gospels, come that they may have life and have it to the full. But what do Allah and Muhammad say? Quran, they fight in the cause of Allah, they kill and are killed. In the Hadith, Muhammad, I would love to be martyred in Allah's cause, come back to life and be martyred again, over and over again. This is the difference. So the conquest of Mecca in 630. So it was a 10-year treaty, but after only 2 years, Muhammad went back to Mecca. And of course, they just surrendered. There was a list of people to be assassinated who had mocked him. And they continued to win more battles and fight. But this is nearing the end of his life. And he said, there is no migration after the conquest of Mecca, after the return to Mecca, but jihad and good intentions. And this good intentions, of course, is good for Islam. So this is called forensic linguistics, to understand the difference a word means depending on the context. So jihad and good intentions, when you are called for jihad, you should immediately respond to the call. Now we have submission in Mecca. In a 9-year period, Muhammad personally took part in 27 raids. There were 38 others for a total of 65 armed events, not including assassinations and executions, for an average of 1 armed event every 6 weeks. And this is from Ibn Ishaq, 9th century, highly credited Sirah. Never be a helper to the unbelievers. Fight the disbelievers who are near to you. Let them find harshness in you. Treaties can be signed to gather strength, as in the conquest of Mecca. And here's an example from Yasser Arafat. And he had gone, he was in South Africa, and in regards to the Oslo Accords, he said, I see this agreement as being no more than the agreement signed between our Prophet Muhammad and the Quraysh in Mecca. And this is another verse in the Quran, freedom from obligation is proclaimed for treaties with any polytheist. You have made a treaty. And oftentimes also, Jews don't consider themselves as shirk. Now in Islam, shirk is considered a grave sin. Christians are guilty of it because they associate Christ with God. Well, they also say this of the Jews. The Jews say Ezra is the son of Allah. Now I know Jews don't say that, but according to the Quran, they do. So that makes the Jews guilty of shirk, associating others with Allah. May Allah destroy them, how they are deluded. Now, past and present, you've all heard this far too many times. Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come kill him. But there it is in the Hamas charter. And here we have the importance of influencers. And like I said, we're at the end of Muhammad's life, and eschatology now enters into it. He starts talking about the end times quite a bit. And he also said, had only 10 Jews believed me, all the Jews would have believed me. And he did seek influence, certainly. But this is what you hear behind closed doors. So Imam calling for Jews to be killed in a sermon at a Montreal mosque. Meanwhile, influencers, world leaders are told a different story entirely. And in Sharia, just to show the difference between, how a non-believer is treated and a Muslim is treated, here's an example in the section on justice, that the judge will give both seats of equal honor unless one is a non-Muslim, in which case he gives the Muslim a better seat. How to greet them on the street. Do not greet them before they greet you. And when you meet one on the road, force him to the narrowest part of it. It says, you are the best nation as an example for mankind. You follow Sharia. And if only the people of the scripture had believed, it would have been better for them, but they are defiantly disobedient. It says this in several places. For example, Quran 98:6 says that unbelievers are the worst of creatures, but 98:7 says that Muslims are the best of creatures. Now, this is 2021. And what are they calling on? They're calling on the history. Khaybar, Khaybar, O Jews, Muhammad is coming. This is Vienna. This is London. F the Jews, rape their daughters in the streets, boldly in the streets, nothing happening. And I'll get over this quickly because it's very loud. So now we're looking at Dr. Warner's statistics again. And this is the amount of text that is devoted to the unbeliever. And it is very substantial. And I have actually replicated this. This is using Quranic arguments. In the Quran, fully 64% of it is about the unbeliever, but most people have absolutely no idea what it says about them. I know 2 other people who have replicated these numbers as well, and particularly about the Jews. As I said, in Mecca, not much is said about them, but in Medina, fully 17% is critical about the Jews. And for a total of those 3 texts at the beginning, 9% of those texts are critical of the Jews, whereas Mein Kampf only has 7%. So what do they say about unbelievers in general? That they are cursed, disgraced, evil, hated by Allah, the worst of all creatures. They can be treated nicely if it's useful, or mocked, plotted against or enslaved, beheaded and mutilated, raped, murdered, and terrorized. They must not be taken as friends, is repeated over and over. Here are several examples, which I won't go through, of the sort of thing that is said about Jews over and over again. So now we get to the end of Muhammad's life. And on his deathbed, he said, expel the pagans from the Arabian Peninsula, respect and give gifts to the foreign delegates as you have seen me dealing with them. We'll look at that briefly. And again, it's in the Hadith. Now, this was actually carried out by the second Caliph Umar. All the Christians and Jews were expelled from the Arabian Peninsula. But right after Muhammad died, a number of people wanted to leave this, but thousands were massacred in what's called the Ridda Wars, which means apostasy wars, by the first Caliph. So the legacy today, and like I said at the beginning, questioning Islam is not tolerated. The Ridda Wars are a good example of that. So the legacy today, it is used to justify exclusion zones, religious cleansing, still enforced in Mecca and Medina. Non-Muslims are barred from those cities. And in the final years of his life, he spoke extensively about the end times, that hadith you know of, but he established genocide as divinely ordained, tied to the arrival of the Islamic end times. And I have heard videos with various Islamic speakers very excited about the end times. They think, because Islam is right around the globe now, that they're getting very close. And this is taught today by the jihadi movements and mainstream clerics as literal prophecy. But also that Christ will return, the Son of Mary. He will descend among you, and he will break the cross, kill the pigs, and abolish the jizya. So this, of course, does not come from the Gospels at all. And what will happen to Muslims when they die and on the day of resurrection? Well, if they repent, that a Christian or Jew will be offered in their stead, and that will be their rescue from hellfire. The legacy, End times requires the Muslim slaughter of Jews. The Jews are treated as dhimmis or targeted for extermination. This is embedded in law and modern jihad rhetoric. It is taught in schools, promoted in the Hamas charter. It is mainstream in sermons. And this is not historical. This is ongoing legal and eschatological framework. A brief respite. A look at the Sea of Galilee. I thought we could use one about now. Beautiful. In The Legacy of Islamic Anti-Semitism by Andrew Boston, he cites several New York Times reports on the exodus of Jews from Arab Muslim Middle East. And here are the examples: the extreme discrimination and expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Jews over that period. And here are the headlines themselves. Jews are in grave danger in all Muslim lands, but they're also, of course, in danger in Israel. So in 1948, the 5 surrounding Islamic states not only expelled Jews, they also invaded Israel. And the Muslims in Israel at that time sorted themselves. The ones who wanted to cooperate with this left Israel. The ones who did not want to cooperate, who wanted to stand with Israel, remained. They sorted themselves. And what proof is there that this is the Jewish homeland? There is no greater proof than this. This is the Mount of Olives. These are Jewish graves. This is over 3,000 years old. There is no greater testimony. Here is Jerusalem up on the mount. This is the homeland of the Jews. But from Hamas to the campus protests now. So what's the legacy? We have the Middle East funding of Western institutions to spread the doctrine. The expulsion of Jews from Muslim countries post-1948 parallels the Syria precedents. The charter quotes eschatology, as do the Gaza textbooks and the Islamic leaders. The Muslim Brotherhood spread Sharia doctrine globally. Now, I want to point out that there are a lot more groups than the Muslim Brotherhood. I will focus on that here. But we have the Deobandi, who are in the UK Islamic schools. We have Al-Qaeda, we have ISIS, we have Jamaati Islami, we have Hizb ut-Tahrir. There are so many of them. And the goal, of course, is that the world will submit to Islam. The student protests are using slogans echoing the Islamic conquest language. And this is really, really important. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation rejected the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the UN. Instead, it created and adopted the Cairo Declaration, which views, and it says right in it, Islam as vice-regent of Allah on earth. It asserts human rights must be in accordance with Islamic values and principles, which is Sharia, underpinned by the Charter of Medina and Muhammad's final sermon. 75 years, the UN has had no moral compass, one that points in one direction and one that points in the other. This is the largest voting bloc, very influential because of the global community of Muslims, which it does not command, but nevertheless influences, and its wealth. So how does it present itself? Well, I'm going to show you examples of dualism and deception now. This is Vienna a number of years ago, and the man presents, as our faith commands, preach tolerance and love, and measure our behavior against the exemplary life of our prophet. So this is clear doublespeak, the forensic linguistics I was speaking about. Everyone hearing this speech will say, isn't this wonderful? But of course, we know now that it is not at all. And I'm sure many of you have heard this so many times, where this verse from the Quran is quoted in part. Whoever kills a human being, it is as if he's killed all men, and whoever keeps it alive, it's as if he keeps all men alive, as if this is attributed to Islam and is some benevolent gesture towards, the value of life. In fact, the Quran verse is, for this reason we have prescribed for the children of Israel. It is directed specifically to the Jews. But thereafter, many have remained on earth without measure. After the messengers have come with clear proofs. And it finishes that they have not followed their messengers, okay? That the reward of those who wage war against Allah and his messenger and strive to do mischief in the earth, this is called fitna, is that they all be killed or crucified or have their hands and feet cut off, banished from the land. And I'll show you what wage war means very shortly. But this is the entire verse. And of course, that's not how it is presented. But how often have we heard world leaders citing this kind of doctrine as meaning peace. So President Obama in his 2009 Cairo speech, President George Bush, I heard President Joe Biden say this, but he also said, whoever among you sees a wrong, this is quoting a hadith and saying, you know, basically, isn't this lovely? Let him change it with his hand. If not, then with his tongue. If not, then with his heart. That sounds benign. When you look it up in the Sharia manual, what does it say? The obligation to command the right. This is section Q in the Reliance of the Traveler. By words or by hand, this means, like, for example, breaking musical instruments because they're forbidden in Islam. Intimidation, assault, and finally, force of arms. The soundest legal opinion is that this degree of commanding the right requires authorization from the caliph, but there is no caliph. Another view says there is no need for a caliph's permission. And of course, as long as it's grounded in doctrine, then it's all right. So here is a recent example from Toronto. And here we have the mayor of Toronto in deference, wearing a hijab to these men who have come to her office to talk about Islamophobia. But what do they do in return? He shows the bottom of his bare foot to her, which is a mark of intense disrespect in Islam. So this is the way our society is operating right now, in absolute ignorance of what Islam is talking about, what it means, what different words mean, what different actions mean. And what King Charles said at Ramadan, this was in his speech, Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear, which sounds very merciful, but he didn't finish that verse, which is actually, so give us victory over the disbelieving people. So again, you see, he's taken advantage of, and he doesn't even realize that this verse is used to justify things like crucifixion because Allah doesn't burden the soul beyond what it can bear. So completely, you know, misconceived. They don't understand. So we were talking about jihad earlier, and where does the money come from? Well, this is the National Canadian Council of Muslims, and they are authorized by the Canadian Council of Imams to collect zakat under that category, fi sabilillah, which is the cause of Allah, that they offer legal services. They're successful in presenting the Muslim viewpoint by media, and certainly by lobbying, government letter writing campaigns, etc. Now, there are so many Islamic organizations, they're growing like topsies. So here we have Germany, for example, and, you know, I was there in 1974. Well, look at it now. You know, it is very, very Islamic. Now, these are just Islamic organizations. That this doesn't include another 2,500 mosques. So halal, as I said, simply means lawful. In Islam, slavery is also halal. I'll point that out. But it begins with migration, the money, then the demand. Then we have the certification. Now, this is a Canadian company, and they're paying for certification, which is approximately $2,500. Now we have halal production and sales. So the unbeliever is contributing to the certification money, the sales, the profits and assets. Now this raises the profit, and we have jihad against the unbeliever. So contributing to jihad against ourselves. And we have foreign funding. In Canada, there is no requirement to declare foreign funding of universities. Now, I said I'd say more about the Muslim Brotherhood, which is only one of many groups. But this explanatory memorandum was submitted to court as evidence in the Holy Land Foundation trial, where millions of dollars were being sent to Hamas. It's the largest such trial ever in the United States. And in this evidence, it says that the process of settlement is a civilization jihadi process, a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house. So this document actually dates back to the 1980s. This has been underway for a long time. And at the end, it has a list of alliances, okay, groups that work with it. And the first group that was started by the Muslim Brotherhood, we know that they helped start Hamas, but they began the Muslim Student Association back in 1963. And this here is the International Institute for Islamic Thought. And I highlighted that because if you can see this book here, this is called Canadian Islamic Schools. It's written by Jasmine Zine. And she's a professor at Wilfrid Laurier University. And in the introduction, she thanks the IIIT here for their substantial financial and other support in writing this book. Jasmine Zine is also the head author with her students of the Muslim Voting Guide in 2019, which was later deemed illegal because that's election interference. But I mentioned fitna earlier, and that is to cause disruption in a country. Now, in an Islamic state, fitna means sedition, rebellion, or resistance to Islamic rule. It is punishable by death. Here it is from the Quran, and I told you I'd explain what wage war means. Well, when you search Ibn Kathir, it clearly explains that to wage war against Islam means to oppose and contradict. And it includes disbelief, blocking roads, and spreading fear. And we are having a lot of roads blocked and fear spread these days. So that is actually war being waged against non-Islamic countries. But simply opposing Islam is considered to wage war against it. In non-Islamic states, fitna is used strategically to destabilize societies, as you saw in the explanatory memorandum. And what is criminalized within Islam becomes a tool of subversion outside of it. Now, I'm going to show you something not too many people have seen. And this was obtained in a 1982 raid in Switzerland, a police raid. And it is a comprehensive 12-point plan laying out a non-violent way for infiltrating, influencing, and ultimately dominating Western institutions. This has been carried out to a T. There is no denying this at all. So it has several points of departure. It calls for a worldwide Islamic engagement to establish an Islamic state with progressive efforts targeting at controlling the local centers of power through institutional action, to work within various influential institutions and use them in the service of Islam, to take part in parliament, municipal councils, labor unions, there's been a lot of that, and other institutions in the interest of Islam and of Muslims, and to engage in temporary cooperation, just as Iran did prior to the revolution, cooperation between Islamic movements and other nationalist movements. For example, right now, the National Canadian Council of Muslims has joined with the World Organization of Sikhs, even though doctrinally they have absolutely nothing in common. And to have a permanent force of Islamic dawah and support movements, we're talking influence here, engaged in jihad, stealth or otherwise, around the world, that is largely and efficiently covered by the media. The UN contributes to this. And to nourish a sentiment of rancor with respect to the Jews, with adopting the Palestinian cause as part of a worldwide Islamic plan and by means of jihad, since it acts as the keystone of the renaissance of the Arab world today. Over 4 decades, this plan has been in action. And how is it turning out? Well, this is a new academy going up in Edmonton. There is already an Islamic academy that enrolls 2,000 students. This will house another 1,600, plus the one from the Muslim Association of Canada, which clearly states to live, learn, and lead through Islam. This is the college that the Muslim Association of Canada has established in Toronto for a transformative journey, that they will be offering a multidisciplinary Islamic experience authentically grounded in the Islamic worldview, not Western, Islamic. This is a non-Islamic country. Why would we be doing this? Based on Islamic primary sources, the Quran and Sunnah, along with scholarly Islamic texts, which is all I have shown you today. So we've made it to McGill. What happened there? Over 2 months, this encampment was allowed to stay. The student group called the Hamas massacre heroic. The Muslim Student Association brought pro-Hamas speakers to campus. There were student media publishing Zionist donors control McGill, which is absolutely not true. That there were 45 professors from the university's law faculty that supported the camp at court. They failed to protect Jewish students from harassment with shouts such as "Go back to Europe." And I'll point out, for example, in Victoria, British Columbia, that Fort Victoria was established in 1848. And there were Jews already in Victoria establishing a mosque, which has been in a synagogue at that time, all right, by the 1860s, which has been in continuous operation ever since, with the people only contributing and making Canada the prosperous country it is today. And institutional paralysis. Anti-hate initiative has meant nothing in practice at McGill. So this man is also in Victoria, BC for 15 years. He's been putting videos like this online. And the rest of it is Jews are the enemies of Allah, like it or not. His name is Sheikh Kathrada. 15 years with a youth group, which openly advertises Islamic or legal marriages on its website and actually gets grants from the government. So a friend of mine, Steve Kirby, produced this report recently, February, I believe, yes, the ongoing concerns about Muslim American mosques and events. And just looking at memory videos, which there's few of, okay, he found 153 examples of this kind of rhetoric between October 7th, 2023 and February 15th, 2025. 153, 97 of them at Friday sermons. So this is going on behind closed doors while world leaders are being given dawa and airplanes. So reported hate crime against Jews in Canada, and I shouldn't say that the airplane, that's coming from a nation state, but nevertheless, there's a lot of influence being put against world leaders who clearly have no idea what the doctrine actually says. So when you take the Canadian statistics, you go to the stats page, you'll find that reported hate crime in Jews is, again, in Canada against Jews is 19 times greater than that against Muslims. And I'll mention here that the Islamophobia representative last year was talking about how the hate had increased against Muslims by 79%. That's what she said. It was last year, maybe the year before. And she completely left out the rest of the statistics, which showed at that time that hate crimes against Jews were 18 times higher than against Muslims, and that the hate crimes against Catholics had gone up by over 200%. She left all that out. So that's what I mean about Kitman. So that is omitting things, it's giving a misleading impression. It is still telling the truth, but leaving a huge amount of misinformation out. So Jew hatred in Islam begins with the doctrine, not grievances, not poverty, not mental health. People go to court and they say, oh, well, this is a mental health issue. Actually, just following a different doctrine. The Sirah provides the chronological key. The Quran echoes the events. The execution, expulsion, and subjugation were not political. They were prophetic. The modern movements, Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood, carry the same message. And Western ignorance enables repetition of the pattern. Education is the remedy. People need to know the truth. And recently in the UK, they said, oh, we need to have a closer look at ideology. Well, yes, they do. And they went and collected the books that were being read by Islamic terrorists, okay, people they had captured and jailed. And what they found were books like Milestones, and this is by a founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, this one, the Book of Jihad. But they failed to mention that all of these books reference the Quran and the Hadith over and over again. I've read the Al-Qaeda papers. They were translated by Raymond Ibram. And over, they're quoting the Quran and Hadith. This is what needs to be looked at in non-Islamic countries. And I'm finished. This is my website. I encourage people to look. All of the foundational doctrine is on the homepage, and a little tutorial showing you how to search it yourself. Don't take my word for it. Please educate yourself. Go to the webpage, learn how to do it. Resources have every topic you can imagine: statistical, law, history, women, slavery, finance, you name it. It's all on the resource page from a non-Islamic perspective. And that's my book that was mentioned. This is an overview. It's a primer, and it puts the doctrine into the context of current events in little essays. When you get to the end, there's a brief about women, the Muslim Brotherhood, and a synopsis of Sharia that I've not seen in any other book. It ends with some recommendations, which aren't enough, but they would be a start.
Wow. Thank you, Elaine. Overwhelming. I knew it would be fantastic, and it was, and it's amazing what you crammed into the time. So I know we're past our usual time, but there are people still here, and I'm sure they have questions. And I have a couple just to kick off. I think people are going to be a little alarmed, which is fine. We'd like people, I think, to wake up and be a
Yes,
little alarmed,
yes,
right?
yes,
So given that, as you describe it, The doctrine is playing out in all
Yes.
facets of our society. Education, politics, media, those are the three we hear most often, and on the streets, of course. How should Canadians respond? Give us a couple of thoughts about what, and not just Jews. And I want to stress that to everybody here. This is not a Jewish problem. This is not just anti-Semitism, though the topic we asked Elaine to address was anti-Semitism, but clearly the impact is much greater across the whole of society. So how should Canadians respond? Give us a few.
To educate themselves, clear their mind of what they've been told. Don't take anybody, including my word. You don't need to take anybody's word for it. I had someone tell me one time, I didn't have my books with me. I couldn't prove what I was saying. And he said he had spoken to a Muslim bus driver who said this and this and this. I want to emphasize that not all Muslims are aware of their own doctrine. I am absolutely not speaking about Muslims here. I think the people who are pulling the strings certainly know the doctrine very well, but not the rest. And I'll give an example. Is just recently there was a woman a Muslim woman in UK, a lovely little woman. And honestly, I saw her about 6 months ago and I wondered how long she would last because she had given up a six-figure job to do this. She was trying to be a bridge and her parents had raised her to be British first. And she really didn't know the doctrine that well, you could see, because she was saying, well, why can't you be friendly? And she wasn't calling on Islamists. She wasn't saying, oh, there's all those terrorists who are being bad. No, she was speaking to the Ummah directly, to her peers, and saying, why can't you be more friendly? Why do you have to condemn Christmas? Why are you hiding these grooming gang peoples? That's the sort of thing she was saying, and she was getting death threats. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I saw her and it was so sad. She was terrified and crying and begging for mercy. She says, please don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me. I'm a single parent. I gave up my job to do this and I only mean good. And of course, she doesn't understand good for Islam is not good for everybody else. And she said, I never criticized the doctrine. And she didn't realize that simply by saying to the Ummah, her a Muslim, and saying to the Ummah is that, look, you should be friends with the non-Muslims. She was de facto criticizing the doctrine. And they'd had it. She had 80,000 followers and had simply gotten too big. And now whatever happened the night before, she had to call the police and she's going to have to move. So I really want to emphasize, I'm not talking about Muslims here. I'm talking about doctrine. And, in the West, it's possible for people to, do what they want to do, basically. And certainly the ones calling for Sharia have not lived under it. But eventually it continues to progress. And once, the enforcers have control, like they have in Iran, what's happening in Bangladesh, what's happening in, how long have they had to build bomb shelters now? 20 years in Israel. The doctrine gets stronger and stronger and it gets played out. And in the West, we are facilitating the doctrine. We are giving grants to organizations. That really has to stop. Our leaders need to know the facts and stop imagining that Islam is peaceful. They don't speak to people like me, and I have all the evidence. And not only that, I'll tell you, I am a kind person. I love people. I really love people. I would love it if everyone would get along. But as long as people are believing that this doctrine is true and needs to be acted out, that's not going to happen. So, yeah.
So maybe we can stress that. We do know that there are allies in the Muslim community. And I think
Of
that's very
course.
right. I think the other thing for people to think about is there are allies in other communities. And you gave the example of what's happening against Hindus when you mentioned Bangladesh. We
Absolutely.
know that the Indian Hindu community just had their October 7th when they had the massacre in Kashmir, and 26
Yeah.
people were
Yeah.
murdered
Yeah.
in just the same horrible, terrible way. So I think there are many different communities to reach out to. So maybe one of the first things about getting Canadians to wake up is to find allies
Absolutely.
and not to be quiet, because if it doesn't affect you personally, you might just think it's not important. But I don't think we can afford to stand there and say it's not affecting me, because based on what you're saying, it will affect all of our institutions and therefore it will affect all of us.
It already has. It already has. That 12-point plan I showed of the Muslim Brotherhood at the end there, that's very much underway. In the UK, the National Health Service is now offering training material to staff about how to become a Muslim, how to treat Muslims better. It's just crazy, and
Right.
I want to encourage people too. I have got a YouTube channel, and
Right.
it is called Perspectives on Islam. And there are about a dozen educational videos there about all sorts of things, Islam in the workplace and halal and zakat and deception and all of these things. Now, YouTube rather hammered me because I'm not the sort of person that they want talking very much. But as you saw today, everything that I say, I provide all the evidence. And my goal is absolutely that people can live in harmony, but that can only happen by telling the truth.
I think there are others that we can reference, and maybe I'll put a list together of other books and sources. You mentioned Bill Warner a few times, and
Yes.
I heard him when he spoke in Toronto. In this area of Canada, we have Christine Williams, who is outstanding on the same
Yes.
topic.
Yes.
Some of you
Mm-hmm.
might remember Christine William Douglas.
Yeah.
Richard Spencer has been here. I remember hearing Pamela Geller a number of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really appreciated that you mentioned Bat Yor, and that's her
Yeah. Yeah.
pseudonym. But her book was the first I read on this topic almost 20 years ago,
Yeah.
called Arabia, and what
Yeah.
she foresaw is also happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if
I'd
you,
also like to mention Raymond Ibram. His history is fantastic. And with Robert Spencer, he wrote a book, Palestinian Delusion, for anyone who wants a very readable brief, the complete history of what we're seeing today. I can't recommend a better book.
and you also referenced Andrew Bostom, and if anyone
Absolutely.
today and hasn't heard the webinar I did with him just a month ago, that's also on our website. So
And I want to tell people, look, don't be afraid to speak out. We have a voice. It was given to us for a reason. We need to use it. Don't use it against people, but speak about the doctrine.
no, I think that's very important, and I really appreciate that. Given that our Canadian value system, if you like, if despite what our government leaders have said, there is such a thing, is about multiculturalism and tolerance and inclusion. How do you deal with the language, really, that is almost the opposite of what the doctrine says? So how will you introduce it and not be told, well, that's racist, that's not multicultural, that's supremacist? We need a language for talking about this.
Well, for people who don't have the doctrine at their fingertips yet, but I hope they'll work on it, all they need to call upon is the example of Muhammad. That's it. Just refer to his life. It's been laid out very clearly here today. He arrived as a supplicant in Medina, and within 5 years, there was not a Jew left. And in Mecca, there were 360 idols when he was there, 360 idols. When he went back, they were all eliminated. This is not multiculturalism. Now, Canada has always been a multicultural country, and we have allowed a revisionist history, which I blame the universities for this. It's appalling. And I must say that, the material in the universities that is being vetted by people who adhere to Islam, Islam being an Islamic country is the antithesis of a democratic country. It should not be vetted by people who support Islam. It should be vetted by people who oppose Islam in a non-Islamic country. So now I forget where I was going with that. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I think there's some interesting comments here. What I'd like to let all of our viewers know is that we will gather up the questions and the comments and share them with Elaine. And if she's got the time to write responses, we'll see that we can post them and share them. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming today and listening and hanging in with us. I'm sure that you'll all be interested in sharing the video of this when it's available. And I encourage you to please go on our website, look at the other speakers that we've had on the
I
site.
remembered the end of my sentence.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Okay, is that when I was raised here, that we would go to Chinese New Year, all right? And there was a festival, folk festival in town, and everyone would come. And it wouldn't be, you'd have Native people, you have Mexican people, you have Polynesian, you have everybody. It has always been a multicultural society. And don't let anyone tell you that it wasn't. It always has been. It's always been a very tolerant society. The reason Canada had the wonderful reputation it had is because it was deserved. It was a good country. Of course, it was not perfect. No country is, but it was a very good country. That's why people wanted to come here. And when you look at a global map, a world map, you will see the least tolerant countries and the most tolerant countries. And the Western countries have always been the most tolerant. Now, demographic shift, people are coming from less tolerant countries. That doesn't mean we need to adopt it. Okay.
I think it's also interesting that the Muslim Brotherhood has been banned in several
Yes.
Muslim countries, and more
Yes.
recently in Austria. Austria is the first Western country I noticed that has banned it, and it's sort of a bit of the source for some of the other jihadist organizations, right? So we
Now,
can't.
I just want to say that it is banned in some Muslim Islamic countries, but this is now you're talking nation state. It's a threat politically. It's not that, you know, the doctrine is any different. You know, the Islamic doctrine is the Islamic doctrine, but then there are people who want to protect their turf, and they see, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood as being a threat to that. In 1979, for example, Saudi Arabia, wasn't just Iran, Saudi Arabia had become more liberal, and there was a group that opposed that, and they took over the Kaaba. This had never happened before. They'd gone in there with guns, and what the king did is he called on the ulama, the Islamic scholars, and said, you have to help me because the guards, the police, are afraid to shoot in the Kaaba because this is forbidden, that they will go to hell if they do that. So they won't act for us. And these people have taken over the Kaaba, and they are saying they have the Mahdi with them, which is the end times character. And they are demanding changes so that Saudi Arabia will follow Islamic law more closely, will follow Sharia, because it had televisions. There were all these things happening that are unacceptable. And because jihad is the highest deed, of course, the doctrine is on their side. And so the ulama, the Islamic scholars, were actually themselves not happy with how loosey-goosey it had gotten in Saudi Arabia. And so they said, well, we will give you a fatwa that these people are unbelievers because of what they've done, and therefore they can be killed. And the guards, the police will not go to hell, but we have some things we want. We want the televisions gone. They wanted basically the same things that the jihadis wanted. And so they also demanded that they would give this fatwa on the condition that money from the newfound oil wealth would go to the West. Now, I've written an essay on this, and many people don't realize this. This is when the money started funneling to the West to do the dawah, to Islamize the rest of the world. And it arose from that 1949 event at the Kaaba in Mecca. But
79.
1979, that's right. So the money's been coming for a long time.
It certainly has been, and we haven't been tracking it. So thank you, everyone. I want to wish everybody a good day for the rest of your day. Think about this and think about how you want to act to make a difference. Be well. David, would you put up the final closing slide? And thanks again to our wonderful co-sponsors.
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone who stayed for the whole thing, and Andrea and everyone here. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Be well.
You too.